What makes natural disasters so unpredictable and devastating? Welcome to the Border City Kids, where we explore the top 10 most catastrophic natural disasters since 2000. From tsunamis to earthquakes, hurricanes to wildfires, we delve into the stories of survival and resilience in the face of nature's fury. Tune in to learn more. Some forces of nature are beyond our control.
Hey, what's up, everybody? We're back. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Colin.
And this is the Border City Kids podcast. We got a new episode this week for you. We also have to address our name change this week, which is pretty sweet. We were the Border Kids. Yes, we knew that we spelled border wrong, but we didn't really care. So anyways, we decided to hit the refresh button on that, and now we are the Border City Kids podcast.
Yeah, with a bit of a spelling change.
Yeah,
with B-O-R-D-E-R instead of the B-O-A-R-D-E-R.
Yeah, we actually got it right this time, I think. So I think we might stick with it at least for another week or two before we make another change. I'm just kidding. No, but I think we're gonna stick. There's my voice going again. I think we're gonna stick with this name this time.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, we'll be ready to get our episode 3 started here as well.
Yep, and since the last podcast, Colin's been on another adventure. I don't know if he's gonna dive into it this time.
Yeah, no, I did. Not as much. It wasn't as catastrophic as I would say as the other trip, but no, I went out to visit West and North Vancouver.
Did your
about a week ago?
Plane land upside down?
No, it did not.
Good.
No, the plane ride was good and all that. It was my first time in BC, so it was pretty incredible out there actually. Yeah, it's pretty nice out there. So, luckily this time I didn't have to drive all the way out west. I did fly both ways, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and you had time to actually enjoy it while you were out there, so that's good. Yeah.
Last time I was just in San Francisco for about a day and a few hours before we had to take the plane back after driving the 75 hours. So no, it was nice.
Yeah. So the guy gets back from that big trip, then goes out again, and now he's actually back. I think he's back for a while this time.
Yeah, I'm back for a while.
I think he's gonna stick around this time.
Yeah, I'll be sticking around Southwestern Ontario for a while here.
Beauty. And while we're talking about Southwestern Ontario, our weather is kind of all over the place right now. I think we're kind of doing that mix of like, there's springs on the way, so it's like here's a little hint of spring. So yesterday here it was like 13, 14 Celsius. If you're listening in the USA, that's about 54, 55 Fahrenheit. So you could see like we're used to what, negative 5, 6 degrees Celsius?
-6, 7, 8, where it's pretty typical, but sometimes you'll get minus 15. And then, obviously a few months ago we were minus 20s and things like that. So basically in the past 48 hours we've had almost all 4 seasons, because this morning we woke up to icy conditions, some snow. We got maybe 3-4-ish centimeters here in Ingersoll.
No coating.
Yeah, a bit of blowing snow today and some blizzard-like activities. So.
And all that was like on top of rain that we had last night.
So basically all just froze over, right? So.
And next week I think we're going to be back into the mid-teens again, which is close to 60 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you again listening in the US of A. All right, so speaking of weather, this week's podcast is going to be about the top 10 catastrophic natural disasters that we've seen since the year 2000. So that gives us a good 25 years to go over some of the biggest events that we've seen. Yeah,
it's something a little bit more relevant here in the past 25 years, and that for our viewers too, right?
So nature's fury is a force like any other. In the past 2 decades, our planet has witnessed some of the most devastating natural disasters in human history. From powerful earthquakes to catastrophic tsunamis, these events have reshaped communities, taken countless lives, and served as powerful reminders of our vulnerability. In this video, or this podcast, we'll explore the top 10 natural disasters since 2000, examining their causes, their impacts, and the lessons that we've learned since.
All right, so we'll start out with our top 10 here. The 2006 Java earthquake and tsunami. So this struck off the southern coast of Java, Indonesia in 2006. The earthquake, as far as the details towards it, the magnitude was 7.7. The location was the Indian Ocean, about 200 kilometers south of the West Java. The depth was 48.6 kilometers, which is quite extravagant. So they're saying that the cause to this earthquake occurred due to the subduction along the Sunda Trench, where the Indo-Australian plate is being forced under the Eurasian plate.
All right, so some of the impacts from the tsunami. The earthquake triggered a tsunami with waves up to 7 meters or 23 feet high. The wave struck the coastal areas of West Java, Central Java, and Yogyakarta. I might have mispronounced that, but that's okay. The hardest hit areas include the Pangandaran, the Silicap, and the Kubemon.
So as far as the casualties and damage, there unfortunately was over 600 people who did die in this earthquake and tsunami. There was almost up to there was more than 900 people, so close to 1,000 people who were injured. As far as displacement as well, there was 74,000 people lost their homes, so that's quite a bit.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And the infrastructure that's included was the houses, hotels, businesses along the coast were all destroyed at that point.
Yeah, and I believe this was shortly after a tsunami that happened 2 years prior that was also going to be on our top 10 list. So people had a little bit more awareness about tsunamis and what to do when they happen, right? The response. So when we're talking about the response and aftermath, despite the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Indonesia had no effective tsunami warning system in place at the time, leading to a lack of evacuation before the waves hit. Usually when this happens, when a tsunami occurs, you'll see the water actually go out into the ocean, and it'll almost be like a tide, but it's like a overactive tide, and people don't know how to really react because you haven't seen anything like that before. The Indonesian government, along with the international aid organizations, provided emergency relief, food, and medical assistance. And I would also assume that there was a lot of assistance worldwide, not just from the Indonesian government.
Yeah, there'd be quite a few.
I would assume. I know here in Canada, I would assume we definitely helped them out. For sure, the U.S. definitely helped them out. This event reinforced the need for better early warning systems, leading to improvements in Indonesia's disaster preparedness.
All right, so next we'll move on to number 9. This was the 2001 Gujarat earthquake. It happened in the early morning hours around 8:45 in Gujarat, India. The magnitude was 7.7. The depth was 16 kilometers, so about 10 miles for our Americans there. The duration was approximately 2 minutes long, and it was an intraplate earthquake. This occurred within the Indian plate, not at the tectonic boundary itself, like actually right on
the plate. Yeah.
So some of the impacts included the death toll approximately of 20,000 people. So that's quite a bit more than our number 10 there. There was over 167,000 were injured, and it actually caused about 600,000 people to be homeless, which that's an extensive number. 21 out of the 25 state districts in Gujarat were affected. And then there was about an estimated, as far as the economic damage, 5 billion American dollars were estimated damage. Over 400,000 homes, hospitals, schools, and infrastructure, including some historic sites and temples, were also damaged.
Yeah, when you think about this, like being in Canada, like we are so lucky that we never have anything like this happen to us. Like
I couldn't imagine.
I know every once in a while you get a story on Facebook and you'll read like tiny earthquake you might have felt in like a small city in Ontario, but it's like 1 point something on the Richter scale, so you don't even it doesn't even register, so you don't even feel it like these guys do. Some of the worst hit areas, Outage, which was close to the epicenter, nearly 90% of the buildings were destroyed in that area. Bakau and Anjar experienced extensive destruction and loss of life. Gujarat's largest city saw over 50 multi-story buildings collapse, causing around 800 deaths. All right, so some of the causes and seismology. The tectonic context, when we're talking about the actual plate itself. Gujarat is part of the Indian plate, which is moving northward, causing stress accumulation. The earthquake was caused by a thrust fault due to compression within the plate. So when it comes to plates and all that, I know usually you have two plates colliding, but I think this actually took place on the actual plate itself. So it wasn't at a fault area. Seismic waves, they were felt all across Pakistan, Western India, Nepal, and even parts of southern India. Shaking lasted for approximately 2 minutes, causing extensive ground rupture and liquefaction. Now, I'm not even sure what liquefaction is, but I'm assuming that this might have to do with some after tremors that they might have felt. Okay. Some of the immediate responses.
Yeah, so we got some human response and challenges that they've had to face. So the immediate response was that the Indian Army and Air Force launched massive rescue and relief operations. Over 15,000 soldiers were deployed for rescue missions at the time. Some of the international aid, over 20 countries provided aid, including the US, the UK, Japan, and Israel. There was assistance included with medical teams, financial aid, and even supplies. So they did quite a bit in that sense. Some of the challenges that they did face were blocked roads, damaged infrastructure, hindered a lot of the rescue efforts in itself. So even for them to get there and to actually help out is pretty difficult too.
I can't imagine.
The lack of heavy machinery delayed the removal of a lot of debris that is obviously going to take days and maybe months to clean up.
No machinery over there, nothing to move anything.
It's a lot different there than it is here, and obviously with the debris, it'd be even hard to even use the machinery that they have.
A third world country almost, right?
Yeah. So shortage of the medical facilities led to challenges in treating the injured people.
Okay, so some of the reconstruction and rehabilitation. For funding, the Indian government and international donors pledged over $1 billion for reconstruction. The focus areas, the earthquake-resistant infrastructure, new buildings constructed following strict seismic codes. So these new buildings were built with ways to resist different tremors and earthquakes on the Richter scale. So I assume they had to use different materials that were way better than what was already there. Housing, they rebuilt over 300,000 homes under safer designs. Economic recovery, focus on reviving small businesses and agriculture in Cooch, I assume is how I'm going to say that. And the successes. The reconstruction program was seen as a model for post-disaster recovery with improved urban planning and public participation. So I assume this whole event was a pretty big eye-opener when it came to rebuilding, cleanup for sure, right?
Yeah.
Because
I think it taught them a lot of lessons, which we'll actually get into next too.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, so some of the lessons that they learned, the importance of the building codes. So many of the buildings that collapsed were due to the substandard construction and lack of compliance with the seismic codes. So they actually, I'm also presuming that they increased the codes, kind of built them up a little bit more to make sure everything was more put up to code.
Yeah, they probably got to be able to withstand certain amounts of
certain limitations.
Tremors on the Richter scale,
as well as the disaster preparedness. So they emphasized the need for early warning system signs, emergency drills, and public awareness. And then they also learned about different community involvement and successful recovery. This was partly due to the involving local communities in rebuilding the efforts as well.
Okay, so just to finish this one off here, some of the legacy and memorials. They built a Smriti Van Memorial, which was built in Bhuj to commemorate the victims, featuring a museum and information center. Annual commemorations is held every year on January 26th, and that date kicks to me when I think about Kobe Bryant.
Yeah,
January 26th, right?
Yeah.
To honor those lost and raise awareness about disaster preparedness. So every year they do that in January, just as a memorial to what had actually happened all those years ago. So that was number 9.
All right, next we'll get to our number 8, the 2010 Pakistan floods. So the 2010 Pakistan floods were one of the worst natural disasters in the country's history, affecting nearly 20 million people and causing widespread devastation. Some of the causes to this flooding was the heavy monsoon rains. So unusually intense monsoon rains began in late July in 2010. The Indus River overflow. So the Indus River and its tributaries, they were overflowed, leading to massive flooding at the time. They also had some glacial melting, which I actually feel like around here, I know we don't really have the glaciers around here, but with all the flooding we've had here in the past couple days, on farming fields and things like that with the
I know the way it's looking,
winter,
we might actually end up on this list.
Yeah. So some experts believe that the melting glaciers in the Himalayas contributed to the excessive water flow as well.
All right, so we're looking at the impact. There were over 1,700 people killed, displaced more than 20 million people. They were affected, with millions losing their homes. Some of the infrastructure damage, 1.9 million homes were destroyed. Roads, bridges, farmlands were all washed away, obviously. Damage to the power plants led to widespread electricity outages, and I'm sure this just caused complete chaos there, right? They can't. Yeah. When I think about Pakistan, how do you function without technology, without farms, with all the lands being washed away, right? Agriculture, 2.4 million hectares of crops were destroyed. Major food shortages followed, affecting rice, wheat, and sugarcane production.
Which is big production over there, I think.
Yeah, huge. It all comes from over there, and we get it imported here. That's right. Economic loss. estimated at $43 billion, making it Pakistan's costliest disaster.
Wow. Yeah, that's a significant amount. So what they did in response and relief efforts, they had some government and military aid. So the Pakistani military carried out rescue operations using helicopters and boats to save the stranded people. There was quite a few, obviously. Emergency shelters were set up, but many victims lacked proper food, water, and medical care at the time. Some of the international aid, the United Nations, the USA, China, and some other countries provided financial aid, food, and medical supplies at the time. The UN called the disaster the greatest humanitarian crisis in recent history. So that definitely says a lot. Some of the challenges that they faced were delays in the aid delivery due to damaged roads and political instability at the time. Some outbreaks of the waterborne illnesses and diseases such as cholera, malaria, and diarrhea at the time.
And some of the long-term effects, these floods set back Pakistan's economy and agricultural sector for years. This increased poverty, obviously, with what happened, and food insecurity in affected areas because they had nothing. Calls for better flood management systems and improved disaster preparedness. I don't know how you go about fixing that.
That's a big one.
I feel like that's going to cost billions and billions and billions of dollars, and I just feel like that's going to take forever to do something in an area where it's probably prone to happening again while they actually set it up.
And that's the sad part about those areas is that when you try to rebuild something up, something else tends to happen in that rebuild. So it's pretty devastating at that time. All right, so we're going to go on to number 7 here. It's the 2013 Typhoon of Haiyan in Yolanda, Philippines. It happened in November of 2013. It was a category super typhoon. Some of the wind speeds, too, were just significant. 195 sustained miles per hour wind speed, up to 235 miles per hour gusts. So that's roughly 380 kilometers an hour.
That's insane.
That's if I think of some of the storms
nuts.
we have here. When we get weather warnings,
we get like 50 kilometer an hour winds here.
Yeah,
and we're crying
sometimes
about
we can
it.
get 70 to 90. We can get up to that. But if I think of like 380, that's just unbelievable.
I feel like my hair would go flying off.
So it was one of the strongest tropical cyclones that they've ever recorded at landfall. It was up to 20 feet storm surge, so about 6 meters high in some areas.
And that's actually the most dangerous part about a hurricane or a typhoon, right? That's if people are inland about, let's say, like even a kilometer and the water goes up 20 feet.
Oh, yeah.
You're screwed.
That's very significant.
Yeah. That's usually the most big damage, big death toll taken from the storm surge. Some of the impacts of the typhoon. The death toll was estimated at approximately 6,300 people, and there's over 1,000 missing. There was over 28,000 people injured, and more than 4 million people displaced. So 4 million people got moved around. Isn't that wild?
That's quite something.
The affected population, around 14 million across 44 provinces. That's insane.
And I will say, like, the Philippines, I mean, I've never been, but I do know that it's just a cluster of islands, too. So if you even think that 44 provinces were hit, we have 10 provinces
10
here,
provinces, 3
right?
territories,
So if you think that's just it's just so widespread.
Yep.
Too, right?
Yeah, and you're surrounded by water out there, so there's really not much you can do, right?
Yeah.
You're pretty much
It's
testing
devastating.
it. Yeah. Sure. Yep. So there was over 1.1 million homes destroyed, with 550,000 completely wiped out. The estimated economic damage was $5.8 million US dollars. So that's I want to say like $8 or $9 billion Canadian.
Yeah, with the exchange rate right now.
Yeah, exchange rate's terrible right now.
So some of the worst hit areas was the Tacloban city. So the epicenter of the devastation was here. Over 90% of the city was destroyed, unfortunately. It reached to downtown areas, causing massive casualties. And just in this city alone, 2,500 plus death toll. So that's quite significant. It also hit the eastern Samar, which is coastal villages that were flattened. Significant casualties and infrastructure were lost, as well as a few cities such as Cebu, Iloilo, and Palawan. So severe wind damage and flooding, but there was fewer casualties compared to Leyte and Samar, the other regions there.
Once again, this just reminds me of like how lucky we are to be where we are, right? We don't get any of these kind of things. We might get like a severe thunderstorm warning or a foot of snow dropping.
Tornado, maybe.
A tornado. But even like in Sarnia, the last really confirmed tornado was like 60, 70 years ago, right? So we don't get any of this. Some of the causes and meteorology. This originated from a low-pressure area in the Pacific Ocean on November 3rd of 2013. Rapid intensification due to the warm ocean temperatures and low wind shear. So this made the hurricane go from like a quick Category 1 to a Category 5 real quick.
Wow, scary.
Yep. As long as you got warm ocean temperatures, I guess that's how she goes. Factors contributing to devastation. The storm surge, right? The storm surge is always going to get, it's like a tsunami. So we had a 20-foot wall of water pretty much come inland, which killed a lot of people. High wind speeds, flattened buildings, uprooted trees, and disabled communication lines. And the timing struck during early morning hours.
Wow. Yeah, so that'd be quite the early morning for you, too.
It caught many residents off guard.
So as far as the response rates, so they did have an immediate aftermath. So there was chaos and despair, obviously, looting in the Tacloban area due to shortages of food, water, and medicine. There was also communication breakdown due to the downed power lines and destroyed roads, delayed during the rescue efforts. There was a government response as well. The Philippine government declared a state of national calamity, and they were criticized for slow and uncoordinated responses, apparently, and particularly in the Tacloban area. So that's 2,500 plus.
I feel like it doesn't matter who's always in charge.
Really
I feel like everyone always gets criticized for the response, and it's like there's only so much you can do.
Yeah,
right?
it's tough.
It's
tough.
Place
like, I mean, it's something
totally devastated.
Yep. Yeah, it's something that just it happens, and you can't always be prepared for it either, right?
Yep.
So some of the international aid, over $1 billion US, pledged by 50 plus countries. So that's like 50 plus countries helping out with that is quite significant.
I assume Canada was on that list.
Yeah, I would think so. From what we have here, the US, the UK, Japan, Australia, as well as the UN. The U.S. Navy deployed by USS George Washington Carrier for relief operations also helped out. So some of the challenges that they faced is logistics hampered by the destroyed airports and seaports. Makes a lot of sense there, as well as difficulty distributing the aid to the remote and island communities. Because think about it, it's all separated, right?
Yeah.
How do you get there, right?
Yeah, and if there's nowhere to land, everything's destroyed.
Oh yeah.
Are you sending by boat?
Right.
Right. Like, what are you doing?
That's very tough.
Yep. So when we talk about some heartbreaking tales, obviously many families separated by the storm surge, many lost their lives and many lost loved ones that day. Survivors clung to debris for hours in rising water. So I'm going to assume if there were trees and the water went up high enough, people wrapped their arms and legs around the trees and hung on and started yelling for people to find them. When we talk about stories of courage and resilience, local volunteers organized makeshift rescue teams. Residents of Tacloban rebuilt their communities despite immense loss.
So some of the reconstruction and recovery efforts. So some funding by the Philippine government launched about $3.9 billion of recovery plan. The focus areas included permanent housing, so they built 205,000 plus homes in safer locations, which, I mean, I presume safer locations as in maybe areas that may not be hit again?
Yeah.
Like in those areas?
Or maybe just further inland if that's possible.
Yeah, that could be too, kind of away from the coastal
Storm
areas.
surge, yeah.
Some of the livelihood programs that they built, support for farmers and fishermen to restart businesses. Some of the infrastructure included coastal defenses and early warning systems that were upgraded, as well as schools and hospitals rebuilt with disaster-resistant designs. So I couldn't even imagine, going to school and then the next day, your school's gone.
Yeah,
right? So,
snow day.
Yeah, well, for them, it'd be a water day.
Yeah, water day. Unbelievable.
So some of the challenges they faced were delays due to the funding gaps, corruption, and bureaucratic inefficiencies within Philippines in general. Many survivors remained in temporary shelters for years. Like, imagine doing that for years. I mean, sometimes you hear about it for a month or 2 months, but for years, that's devastating for sure.
Yeah, and once again, it's one of those things where, like, by the time they start rebuilding and get around to it, another one comes.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Like another.
And I think the Philippines in general. I think even every year, maybe every couple of years, they have something happen.
Yep,
right?
hotspot every year.
It's tough.
Yep. So some of the lessons learned, obviously, disaster preparedness. Looks like every time we have a hurricane or a typhoon or a tsunami, we're always looking to have some enhanced early warning systems just to get people to evacuate early. I know some people like to tough it out. We learn every single time storm surge is the killer when it comes to these storms. So some people think they can make it, and unfortunately, they don't. Climate change awareness highlighted the increased risk of stronger typhoons due to the warming seas and obviously them being surrounded by water, right? Completely devastating. Yep. And community involvement, empowering local governments and communities for a quicker response.
So just to finish this one off, some legacy and memorials. So Tacloban actually has a memorial there. They have sites honoring victims, including a mass grave memorial. They also have annual commemorations. So this is held every November 8th to remember the victims and promote disaster readiness for maybe like future disasters that take place. And then some of the global impact, they strengthened the international collaboration on climate change and disaster management as well. So this was a significant one.
Yeah, this is number 7, but I feel like it could have been in the top 3 very easily.
Yeah.
So that was number 7. On to number 6.
All right, so we're going to go number 6 here, 2008 Sichuan earthquake. So the 2008 Sichuan earthquake was also known as the Wenchuan earthquake, was one of the deadliest earthquakes in China's history. It struck the Sichuan province in 2008 in May. So some of the details was 7.9 magnitude. The Wenchuan County and Sichuan provinces were the epicenters to it. The depth was about 19 kilometers or 12 miles. The cause to this was the earthquake occurred along the Longminshan Fault, where the Indian plate collides with the Eurasian plate. So kind of similar actually to our number 10, creating immense tectonic pressures.
But this one actually occurred along the fault line by the looks of it. So the Longminshan Fault line, so that's where the Indian plate collides with the Eurasian. So the two hit each other. So some of the quick impacts here, over 87,000 people were affected. More than 370,000 people were injured. Around 18,000 people were never found at all, so still missing today. And displaced, over 4.8 million people left homeless. Can you imagine?
Some of the damage and destruction. So some of the buildings that collapsed were entire towns, villages were all destroyed, schools and hospitals particularly affected, leading to deaths of thousands of children. Dude, just awful. Roads, bridges, railways were severely damaged, making rescue efforts very, very difficult. Landslides and dam failures added to the destruction as well, and there was about $150 billion economic loss, making it one of the most expensive disasters in history.
Wow. So some of the response and relief efforts, the Chinese government response, over 130,000 soldiers and emergency workers were deployed. The government allocated billions of dollars for relief and rebuilding. Awfully nice of them. International aid. Countries such as the US, Japan, Canada, and Russia provided aid funds and rescue teams. The Red Cross and some non-governmental organizations sent medical teams and supplies. Some of the challenges, obviously the difficult terrain made reaching some affected areas nearly impossible. And survivors suffered from lack of food, water, and medical care.
That's kind of the routine trend with all these too, eh?
Yeah.
So some of the aftermath and reconstruction. So rebuilding efforts included China launching a massive reconstruction project that took years to complete. Earthquake-resistant buildings were then also prioritized throughout the country. Some of the controversies, many poorly constructed schools collapsed, leading to public outrage and demands for accountability on, who this kind of falls under. The government faced criticism over media censorship and suppression of protests as well.
So what does that mean when they say media censorship on it? So what did they want to not show people that were
that's what I'm wondering about the response? Yeah, I'm also wondering the same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting there. Okay.
Yeah. And then some of the legacy, led to improved earthquake monitoring and stricter building codes in China. It also raised awareness of natural disaster preparedness worldwide, which again is very, very relevant. Survivors and families continue to remember the event as a major tragedy in China's modern history.
Wow, yeah, so they all have the same theme, right? It happens, and then our response is to look for better response strategies to these things. Yeah, wow.
So
that was number 6, yo.
Yeah, number 6. So we are going to go into number 5 here, the 2003 European heat wave. So this is quite a interesting one, I think, because it was a full-out European heat wave, not just one country.
But I also want to point out that this was also the year that we had our big outage, our power outage.
Yeah,
in
we did.
Canada.
Didn't we? Yeah, in Canada too. Yes,
2003, if I remember right.
I think when I was, I was at a cottage up north at the time. And we had no power out, up northern Ontario at a cottage for about 2 days.
Oh, you had it out for 2 days?
Yeah, we had it out for 2 days, and we had kind of heard what was going on back home too. But it affected us it was up to 2 days, and it was quite something.
Yeah, if I remember right, it was right when I was starting high school. I was 14, so it would have been 2003.
And it was in those summer months too.
Unreal.
So this European heat wave, it affected regions of Western and Southern Europe, particularly France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Germany, and the UK. They reached some temperature records actually at that time. So France actually reached 44.1 degrees Celsius, or 11 and 111
111.4
Fahrenheit in southern regions. Portugal peaked at 47.3. Wow, that's quite something. Actually,
Insane.
When I was in Portugal a few years ago, it in the Douro Valley, it actually reached up to 45 degrees
Wow,
Celsius.
you got
And they said that
You got
was
close.
Yeah, and they say that is the hottest region of Portugal. So 47.3 is I couldn't imagine. The UK recorded its first ever 38.5. So if you think about that's pretty hot for the UK for all the rain that they get too.
Yeah,
right?
it's true. Yeah, they are covered by rain quite a bit of the year. Yep.
Yeah. So the extreme heat wave caused by persistent high pressure systems that trapped hot air over Europe.
Wow, insane. Some of the impacts of the heat wave. The death toll is estimated at about 70,000 plus across Europe.
That's just below the amount of city of Sarnia.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. Yep, exactly. 70,000 plus. So it could have been more. This made it one of the most deadliest natural disasters in European history. France suffered 14,802 deaths. It was the worst hit area due to unprepared healthcare systems and urban heat islands. So even if you had hospitals and whatnot, I assume they didn't have backup generators or anything, and without
At that point.
electricity, you're screwed. Italy had 20,000 deaths with high mortality among the elderly. Obviously, that makes sense with the hot temperatures, right? No electricity.
Right.
Spain suffered 15,000 deaths, severe impacts on agriculture, and some of the injuries and health issues. Thousands suffered from heat stroke, dehydration, and respiratory illnesses.
So some of the causes to this in the meteorology, so the weather patterns was an anticyclone, so it was a high-pressure system. It was a stable high-pressure system over Western Europe that blocked cooler Atlantic air coming in, causing prolonged heat and dry conditions at the time. Then there was also a jet stream shift, so this moved northward, allowing hot air from the North Africa to flow into Europe.
Wow, and
in particular,
that's desert heat, pretty
it
much,
is,
right?
Yeah, and that's why you see you getting up to the high 40s too, right? Climate change factor also came into effect, so studies suggest the heat wave was twice as likely due to the climate change, with rising greenhouse gases exacerbating the situation as well.
Wow. So when we look at the worst hit countries, France, nearly 15,000. Obviously, because of aging population, lack of air conditioning, and electricity, people suffered. In Paris, the urban heat island effect intensified temperatures, causing most of the fatalities. In Italy, they had approximately 20,000 deaths. Severe drought led to agricultural losses, and water shortages. Spain suffered over 15,000. Wildfires, definitely wildfires. Super hot, super dry. It's like lighting a torch, and there she goes. Portugal, death toll was 2,100. Wildfires burned 10% of Portugal's forests.
Wow.
That's huge.
It is.
Wow. An estimated 1 billion euros in damage. That's insane. Germany, death toll was around 9,000. Their impact, low river levels, disrupted shipping and industrial production. Wow.
So some of the environmental impacts, so like we mentioned earlier, the wildfires. So Portugal had the worst wildfires in 50 years ended up happening there. Burning over 4,000 square kilometers of forest. Spain and Italy have had large-scale fires due to the dry conditions in those two countries. Some of the agricultural losses also included damages exceeding 13 billion euros across Europe. Key crops affected that were corn, wheat, fruits, and grapes for wine production. I know in Portugal the wine production is huge. So that would affect jobs. That would affect the quality of food and the quality of the wine as well. Livestock deaths, so thousands due to heat stress and lack of water. And then they actually had a glacier melt, which is really interesting. It accelerated melting of the alpine glaciers by 5 to 10% at that time. So they had permanent snow lines receded, that's quite something in all of those countries to feel that the heat, that they actually had snow lines receding.
Wow.
Impacting tourism and obviously water sources.
Wow. So some of the humanitarian crisis and response for the healthcare system strain. Hospitals were overwhelmed, obviously, due to heat stroke and the hot temperatures, dehydration, especially in France and Italy. Morgues reached capacity with refrigerated trucks used for temporary storage of bodies.
Wow.
Government actions. France, slow initial response led to public outcry, eventually declared a public health emergency. I feel like they would have declared a public health emergency before it happened, but I guess not. Spain and Portugal mobilized emergency services for wildfire control. International aid, obviously, you're going to see a ton of countries come to assist Europe on this one. Limited cross-border assistance due to the simultaneous impact on multiple countries.
So then some of the lessons that they learned in reforms were heat action plans. So France introduced the plan Canicule. It was a heat wave plan in 2004, focusing on early warnings, emergency hotlines for the elderly, as well as cooling centers in public buildings. The urban planning included initiatives to combat urban heat islands by planting trees and creating green roofs. Focus on improving ventilation and reducing the asphalt and concrete surfaces as well. The climate change awareness, this accelerated adoption of the renewable energy and climate adaptation policies in the EU, and they also strengthened the emission reduction targets under the Kyoto Protocol.
The economic impact, the overall cost was estimated at about 13 billion euros or 15 billion US dollars. Sectors affected, obviously the agricultural sector was affected, major losses in grain, wine, like we said earlier, and dairy production. Hydropower, because of the low river levels, hydropower was very limited. Tourism, mixed impact. Some coastal areas saw an influx because obviously they're close to water. So
Right. Oh, yeah.
I bet you they actually had more than usual.
Probably.
Yep, while inland regions obviously face cancellations because of the heat.
Right.
No electricity, no relief.
Unbelievable. So just to finish this one off, some legacy memorials. So they do have annual commemorations. France observes a heat wave memorials every August, actually, to honor victims and raise awareness. They did have some policy changes. So the European countries adopted heat health warning systems and emergency preparedness plans. And the scientific impact served as a wake-up call for Europe on risks of climate change and extreme weather patterns.
That was a lot for that one.
That was a lot. Yeah, that was a lot. Yeah.
They went through quite a bit there. And it's actually weird when it said the 2003 heat wave, because I'm like, we went through one too. And I remember the power was out here for 3 days right before high school started. That's
interesting.
Wild.
Yeah.
That's how old I am.
Yeah, again, like we mentioned, about 7 years gap, right? Between us.
Yeah, I feel like I'm almost a grandpa here, and I got a child over here beside me.
So next we got number 4. So this is 2005 Kashmir earthquake. Yeah, so the 2005 Kashmir earthquake was one of the deadliest earthquakes in South Asia's history, striking Pakistan-administered Kashmir and parts of India. It was a 7.6 magnitude. The depth was 15 kilometers, so not as much as we've seen in others, but it's still 15 kilometers. The fault was the main boundary thrust, which was in the Himalayan region. Some of the impacts included death tolls over 86,000 people, mostly in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. More than 100,000 people were injured, and it displaced around 3.5 million people were left homeless. So some of the countries that were affected was Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. We then have the damage and destruction. So cities, there was a worst hit city, Balakat and Beg in Pakistan, Baramulla and Uri in the Indian administered Kashmir. The infrastructure that was damaged was 80 to 90% of damages in buildings of Muzaffarabad collapsed, including schools, hospitals, and homes. So it's kind of the same theory and scene pattern that we've been seeing. As far as, the roads, the bridges, and communication systems were all destroyed as well.
Unbelievable. So we're looking at landslides, blocked roads, burned villages, obviously worsening the crisis. The response and relief efforts, Pakistan government and military launched one of the largest rescue operations in its history, but they struggled due to difficult mountainous terrain. They provided temporary shelters and food aid. International aid, over $6 billion in aid was pledged from countries like the US, UK, Canada, China, and Saudi Arabia. The United Nations, Red Cross, and non-governmental organizations helped with medical aid, food, and tents. When we talk about some of the challenges, the harsh winter made survival difficult for displaced people.
So it gets cold. See that.
Yeah. Slow reconstruction efforts left many without proper housing for many years. The aftermath and reconstruction, Pakistan launched the Build Back Better program to reconstruct earthquake-resistant homes. So it's like you said earlier, it's just the same theme. Things get destroyed, but we look to improve, right? We want to improve homes, the way they're built, the way infrastructure is built, so it can last much longer and be resistant to some of these disasters.
For sure. And so just to finish this one off about the legacy, the disaster remains one of the most devastating in South Asia's history. Survivors and affected families continue to remember October 8th as a day of tragedy and resilience. It's that's quite a death toll, that's for sure.
Yeah, all these seem to I guess that's why they're on the top 10, right?
Yeah.
Devastating.
So next we'll get into number 3, 2008 Cyclone Nargis is what they called it. It was located in Myanmar, which is a country in the Southeast Asia there. It was a Category 4 tropical cyclone. Wind speeds went up to 135 miles per hour and with gusts up to 155 miles per hour. They had up to 12 feet of a storm surge, so 3.6 meters. Wow.
So this one's actually not as bad as the one we talked about earlier. That had 20 feet of storm surge.
True.
And I think you said the gusts were up to 380 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, which was probably the highest hit on this list for sure.
But I bet you there's more people. This is more populated, so I bet you the death toll is way higher.
I think Myanmar has about 53.7 million people.
Wow.
So that's, it's the impact of the cyclone. So the death toll estimated between 138,000 and 140, making it one of the deadliest cyclones ever recorded. Tens of thousands suffered from injuries, infections, and waterborne illnesses. Over 2.4 million people were left homeless or displaced. Around 7 million people in Myanmar were affected. The economic damage included estimated about 10 billion American dollars, the most costly natural disaster in Myanmar's history. And over 800,000 houses were either damaged or completely destroyed.
Definitely worth the number 4.
This number 3.
This is number 3. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
We've really,
we're moving.
We're
here.
coming along.
Okay, yeah, definitely earning that number 3 spot on the list. Some of the worst hit areas are Irrawaddy, which is near the epicenter of the devastation, where over 95% of the buildings and crops were totally destroyed. The villages, entire communities wiped out by storm surge. Once again, the deadliest thing about a hurricane or a tropical cyclone. Yangon, which is in the district of Rangoon, the infrastructure damage, massive power outages, water shortages, and over 50,000 buildings were completely damaged. Bago, Ayeyarwady, and Mondstadt, severe flooding, blocked roads, and extensive agricultural losses.
So some of the causes, the way it formed was originated as a low-pressure system in a low-pressure area of the Bay of Bengal. It rapidly intensified due to warm sea surface temperatures and low wind shear. The path it moved eastward, striking the densely populated and low-lying Irrawaddy. Storm surge included equivalent to a tsunami, actually, in some areas, with water traveling up to 25 miles inland. Wow.
That's huge.
That is, like, that. If you think about that, that's huge. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
That's getting closer to 35 kilometers for Canadians here.
Yeah, I think you've converted that very well.
8-ish. I'm guesstimating.
I think you did a good job.
The climate change factor, scientists linked the storm's intensity to a warmer sea temperatures in the Bay of Bengal, a possible sign of climate change impacts.
All right, so some of the humanitarian crisis and response from the government, it was widely criticized for slow and inadequate response. There it is again, right? It's never good enough.
It's pretty hard.
Like when you're devastated to a point beyond belief, it's kind of hard to get like a quick response going. They were initially refused international aid and restricted foreign aid workers. When we talk about international aid, United Nations launched a $480 million emergency appeal. Significant delays due to visa restrictions and blocked access for foreign aid workers. When we talk about health crisis, outbreaks of cholera, dysentery, and malaria due to the contaminated water.
Wow, I think that's popped up in a few of our other ones too.
Everything seems to be pretty similar.
So far as the survivor stories and personal accounts, so families were separated by the storm surge, with many swept away by floods. Survivors clung to trees and rooftops for hours. Imagine doing that for hours. Wow.
Hoping, praying someone comes by.
Yeah. Courage and resilience. So obviously the villagers formed makeshift rescue teams using small boats. Community leaders organized local relief despite limited resources. And I will say, I think there is parts like when you're in the Western world, I think if you look at the other places of the world, I honestly think they're probably more resourceful than us because I think they have to be.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah, they're born and raised to be that way, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we kind of depend on everything else to come to us.
We do.
Yeah, we need to be more dependent on ourselves. Absolutely. When we look at some of the environmental impacts, we're going to talk about the agricultural losses. Over 780,000 hectares of farmland was destroyed, causing severe food crisis. Rice crops, major losses led to soaring prices and food shortages, and the fisheries had destruction of fishing boats and gear devastated by coastal communities' livelihoods.
So some of the economic impact, the overall cost is estimated at $10 billion. The sectors affected were agriculture, like Bryan mentioned, some of the infrastructure like roads, bridges, and power lines, and the fisheries, estimated losses of $200 million. Wow.
And when we're looking at reconstruction and recovery efforts, Over $1 billion was funded by the UN for recovery. Some of the focus areas, when we talk about housing, over 200,000 plus cyclone-resistant homes were built.
Wow. I mean, think about cyclone-resistant homes.
Yeah.
Like, that's intense.
I know it's kind of weird to say, but sometimes you almost need some of these things to happen so we can learn and improve the way we do things. You know what I mean? I know it's not really...
Yeah, it's a tough way to say it, but I mean, at that point, like, I don't think I've ever heard of a cyclone-resistant home.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. I think it's finding a positive from a negative situation.
For sure.
When we talk about some of the challenges, corruption and mistrust in government delayed aid distribution, of course. Many survivors remained in temporary shelters. There it is again for years.
So they now have disaster preparedness more intact. They highlighted the need for early warning signs and evacuation. Reforestation projects to restore mangrove buffers in the coastal areas, as well as international cooperation led to establishment of humanitarian assistance center for faster responses, and community involvement, empowering local leaders and NGOs in the disaster management.
Good. And when we talk about memorials, there's a memorial held every May 2nd to honor the victims and promote disaster awareness. When we talk about global impact, prompted reforms in international disaster response protocols for dealing with repressive regimes.
Wow. That was a lot to take in, because I think, cyclones is something kind of rare for, I think, the Western world to even really hear about it.
I feel like before we researched this, I've never even heard of some of these things.
No, I haven't.
And when I hear about the damage and the loss of life in some of these, it's quite an eye-opener, right?
It is.
But at least you, like I say, you pull out some of the positives from a negative situation.
For sure. This next one at our number 2, 2010 Haiti earthquake, I feel like this was really brought upon here in the Western world.
Yes.
This one I think a lot of people gained attraction to. So this was one of the deadliest and most devastating natural disasters in modern history. It struck Haiti on January 12th of 2010. Some of the details included a 7.0 magnitude earthquake.
I think we should address magnitude as well, right? When you have a hurricane that's let's say a 3.0 magnitude, and when you have an earthquake that's 4.0 magnitude, apparently the one that's 4.0 magnitude is 10 times stronger. So for every number that you go up in magnitude on the Richter scale, it's actually 10 times stronger. So when you see a 7.0 and you compare that to like a 3 or 4.0 on the Richter scale, that could be almost like 100 times stronger.
Wow.
When you think about 10 times, 10 times, 10 times, that's incredible, right?
That many times. Yeah. It just goes to show how strong it really is.
Exactly.
So the epicenter was about 25 kilometers west of the Port-au-Prince, which was the main area in Haiti. The depth was about 13 kilometers, and it occurred along Garden Fault, a transform fault where the Caribbean and North American tectonic plates met. Over 50 aftershocks of 4.5 magnitude in the following days.
And those are just aftershocks.
Wow.
Which it's kind of like a tremor, but it's that powerful.
Wow.
Incredible. Some of the impacts, when we look at the deaths, they're estimated, I'm going to say around 300,000 people.
Yeah.
Injuries,
and then an extra 300,000 injuries.
Yeah.
And that's
incredible. Displaced over 1.5 million people. They were left homeless. Buildings destroyed, 250,000 residences, 30,000 commercial buildings. Government buildings obviously included, hospitals and schools.
And then just a quick about the economic damage. The economic loss estimated between $7 and $14 billion, about 120% of Haiti's GDP at the time. 120%. Wow.
That's incredible.
Some of the response and relief efforts included Haiti's government and the UN. They had a slow response rate due to government collapse and destroyed infrastructure, declared a state of emergency and appealed for international help at the time. Over $13 billion pledged by countries and organizations such as the US, UN, Canada, the EU. They also sent rescue teams, medical supplies, and food. The U.S. military and the NGOs helped provide relief, but logistics issues caused major delays in this. Some of the other challenges included severe shortages of water and food. Looting and violence actually broke out due to desperation.
That's incredible?
I think the first time we've seen that on this list. Poor coordination among aid agencies led to inefficiencies as well.
All right. And some of the aftermath and reconstruction. Haiti's recovery was slow due to political instability and corruption at the time. There was a huge cholera outbreak.
Man, that cholera, eh?
Every time. Yeah. And I feel like that's brought on by the water, right?
It's a waterborne illness. Yep.
Okay. So that affected over 800,000 people and killed 10,000 plus people. Temporary camps housed hundreds of thousands for years. And as they rebuilt efforts lagged behind, it looks like. Some reconstruction projects were completed, but many areas remain underdeveloped today.
So quickly to finish this one off, the legacy. So exposed Haiti's vulnerability due to the poverty and weak infrastructure. And I feel like they're probably still recovering from this.
Yeah.
Led to global discussions on improving disaster response and rebuilding sustainability. And many Haitians continue to suffer, like we just said, from long-term efforts and effects of the earthquake.
Wow. Okay, so now we're at number 1, and this one is a big memory of mine. We're talking about the Boxing Day Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. Now, this brings back memories, I want to say 20-something years ago for me now.
Yeah.
People waking up right after Christmas Day. People were sitting along the water, and no one had any idea as what was about to happen. If you were sitting looking out on the ocean, what you would have seen is the water kind of go out, and the reason that is because there was an earthquake. I believe the epicenter was off the Sumatra's west coast. So what happens here is that when there's an earthquake underneath the ocean, the water lifts up, and we have something that's called the water displacement theory. So when water's lifted, technically water is being taken out of the ocean, and the water that's kind of by the coastline needs to come out further. So what you see is
so you basically seen going out further, so people would maybe either follow it, or they wouldn't think it would come back.
So people become intrigued by what's going on, and some people decide to run out into the ocean where there's no longer water. So
and then it's gonna come right back, even how many times stronger.
And the video I remember quite well is that the guy runs out into the ocean. There's no water there, but if you look further out into the ocean, you see a massive wall of water coming towards him. And it's very unfortunate, and I don't know what happened to him, but what you see is a wall of water pretty much run him over, and the water just comes inland. So this was the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. The magnitude of this earthquake was 9.1 to 9.3. This is the third strongest earthquake ever recorded. Wow. The epicenter, like I said, was off Sumatra's west coast at a depth of 30 kilometers or 30,000 meters under. The tsunami waves, here we go, heights of up to 30 meters.
What? 30 meters?
Yes, meters.
Yep. Wow.
98 feet high. In
look at the speeds too.
The speed is incredible. And that's what I mean when you when you see someone run out into the ocean because they're curious that there's no water there, and then you see water traveling at speeds to 500 to 800 kilometers an hour, you're in trouble. The duration of the shaking of the earthquake was about 8 to 10 minutes.
That's long.
Longest ever recorded.
Wow, okay. Some of the impacts of the tsunami, the death toll, approximately 230 to 280,000 people were killed across 14 different countries, too.
Wow.
This injured 500,000 people, ranging from fractures to severe trauma. More than 1.7 million people lost their lives that day. Estimated 15 billion American dollars. Countries affected included Indonesia, which was the hardest hit, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, and other nations such as the Maldives, Malaysia, Myanmar, Somalia, Tanzania. There's quite a few countries.
So when you look at the causes and geology, when you look at the tectonic activity, when you're looking at the plates, the result of the thrust fault along the Sunda megathrust, where the Indo-Australian plate was subducted beneath the Burma plate. So I assume there was some movement of plates, one sliding underneath the other, lifting the water up and sending, the waves into inland. Along the coast, the region there. Some of the energy released equivalent to 1,500 Hiroshima bombs.
Really?
Isn't that incredible?
Wow.
So that's like dropping 1,500 Hiroshima bombs into the ocean and watching it blow up and see how high the waves go. The seafloor displacement, the vertical displacement of up to 20 meters or 66 feet, displacing 30 cubic kilometers of water. The aftershocks had magnitudes of up to 7.5 on the Richter scale.
So if you think about some of the other ones here in our top 10 list, a lot of them didn't even hit, some of them didn't hit 7.5. Exactly. So to have aftershocks of that for 8 to 10 minutes is wild. So next we'll get into the humanitarian crisis and response. Immediate challenges included clean water and sanitation. There was obviously a severe shortage causing outbreaks of cholera again. Healthcare hospitals were overwhelmed. Makeshift clinics were set up. There was over 40,000 children were left orphaned, actually. Wow, that's pretty sad. International aid included 14 billion American dollars in aid pledged globally. The largest donors included the United States, Japan, Germany, and Australia. United Nations also coordinated massive relief efforts, described as the largest humanitarian response ever.
Wow. And when we look at the environmental impact, coral reefs were severely damaged, water intrusion affected farmlands and freshwater sources, turtles, fish, and coastal birds populations hit hard. Erosion and debris, massive coastal erosion, and millions of tons of debris were deposited inland.
So some of the reconstruction and recovery efforts included funding, so over 14 billion USD in international aid and donations. 200,000 plus new homes were built in Aceh and Sri Lanka. Livelihood, so microloans for fishermen and small businesses did restart. Infrastructure such as roads, schools, and clinics were rebuilt with a focus on disaster resilience itself.
Wow. So, and this kind of goes with the theme of the other ones when we're talking about warning systems. So the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System was established in 2006, so 2 years after this happened, by UNESCO. Network of seismic and oceanic sensors to detect future tsunamis. So I assume that these are all sensors that were placed out in the ocean to detect maybe some, maybe if it's tremors beneath the waters, or if it's talking about rise of water altitude or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense. Disaster preparedness, evacuation drills, and community awareness programs were launched. Focus on building back better with disaster-resistant infrastructure. Once again, goes along with the theme of all the other ones. When we talk about international cooperation, strengthened protocols for rapid aid deployment.
And to finish us off, some of the memorials and legacies. So memorials such as Tsunami Memorial Parks in Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, they commemorate, as well as an annual commemoration December 26th. It's marked with prayers and memorial services throughout the countries. And there is obviously an elevated focus on tsunami education and drills worldwide. So that actually ends our top 10 for this week. As far as that goes, we also wanted to mention too that we have started some marketing online. So we are there on Instagram, the Border City Kids.
Yep, we got some updates going here.
Yeah, we've got some updates going.
We got a YouTube channel going now.
Yep.
We're on Spotify. Yep. I think we're going to take our focus more to YouTube, but we are on Spotify. If that's what you use, we're gladly there to be there for you.
Yep. And the other thing too I was going to mention was for our next podcast, we're going to shift gears quite a bit. I know the first two that we've done here, we've done more on weather here, and then we've also done planes. So some current events going on, and to me, another current event that I've really liked is the Canada and America hockey. So I'm thinking that our next podcast, we're probably going to do the top 10 American Canadian hockey games. At Best on Best games, we'll include World Junior performances, things like that.
World
Olympics,
things
like
course,
that. I mean, obviously, that's
probably
the greatest hockey rivalry.
I feel like I already know what number one's going to be, but I'm not going to say it right here.
I think all Canadians know what number one is.
I think so.
Yeah. And I mean, aside from the Russia-Canada rivalry, which is also excellent rivalry, I would say the American and Canadians probably the number one rivalry.
Oh, absolutely. And you can see from the ratings just from the four nations. Right?
It did very, very well. And
lots of people watching.
Yeah, there was people, throughout the States, because I know in the States, you have football and basketball as their major sports too. So I think as far as the States, people really grasped onto this for 2 weeks and they said, wow, this is hockey.
Good friendly competition between the two. We love it. So what we need you guys to do on YouTube, if you're there, can you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button? Please mention this to anyone who wants to listen to something interesting on a Friday night.
All right. Well, we wanted to thank everyone for listening today, and we'll be back next week with our next topic.
We'll be back next Friday with the top 10 Canada-US hockey games.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, y'all.